Hi, everybody. Thanks, Arnab, for welcoming me and having me on.
Of course, absolutely. It's our pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this for us, both you and Nishan.
Is it possible to make me the host so I can share a
Yeah,
presentation? That'll be easier for us all to
absolutely.
follow along. Do you guys see my screen?
hmm Yeah.
Okay. Hey, thank you so much. As you can see on your screen, what I'm trying to help people is learn about India. And also for those who already know some part of India, help them unlearn India or at least think about it in a different way than they might have seen before. What we will touch upon today is caste system, untouchability, and arranged marriages. We'll also talk about a very key figure in Indian history, modern history, through late 1800s into mid 1900s. Dr. Ambedkar. Very few of you, for sure, but even very few of Indians know about him or give him the credit that we need to. We'll touch upon present day India a little bit, and then we'll take Q&A, but also Q&A can jump in and out. After each of these sections, I can take a pause and ask you guys to if you have any questions. My idea here with this presentation is to evoke enough curiousness inside you, enough of a sense of questioning attitude where if you hear X, Y, and Z about India, you will be like, you can question and say, is that true? What is the underlying thing? Why should I accept this as is? Like, for example, if we say, well, India has arranged marriages and most Indian kids have arranged marriages and they are fine with it. Is that it? Can you take it at face value, or do you want to question further and say, what exactly does arranged marriage serve? Is there a more sinister something that it serves? So that inquisitiveness is what I want to bring out in all of you guys who are reading, listening to me today. Not that you'll have an answer to every single thing, because trust me, after 20 years, I don't have an answer for every single thing. I want to start with something familiar. If you look at the screen now, you see Hindu gods and goddesses. Most of you might be able to recognize them. On the leftmost is Rama. In the middle is Krishna, who is an avatar. All of these, actually, the first two are avatars of Vishnu. And then on the third side, on the third picture is Kali. Look at the representations of other religions. It is pretty easy to see that most of the Hindu gods and goddesses comes with arms and ammunition. They always have weapons on them. Very rarely do you see a Hindu god without a weapon in their hands. In fact, they need multiple hands to hold all the weapons that they want to. The question I ask here is, why such a distinction? What exactly are these Hindu gods and goddesses enforcing? Because you need power, strength, and arms and ammunition to enforce something which is a little bit unnatural for humans. Versus what are these other gods and other religions trying to enforce, which they seem to be able to do more with persuasion or a good argument. So the answer for this will come up in the next few slides here. This is a verse from one of the Hindu sacred books called Bhagavad Gita. In here, the actual text is in Sanskrit. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyudhyanam adharmasya tadatmanam sujamyaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chatushkutam dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. Hopefully you were reading the English version of it underneath, which pretty much mentions that Hindu gods manifest themselves whenever there is a issue of unlawfulness and whenever there are miscreants. And their promise to their followers is that they deliver the pious and they will annihilate the miscreants. And for this purpose, they come time after time. So Rama, Krishna, the other fish version of Vishnu, and there is also a half human, half lion version of Vishnu called Narasimha. They all come to do this exact thing. They want to establish lawfulness. Let's look at two examples, one of Rama and another of Mahabharata, where Krishna is the more famous god in there, to see what are some of these things that they enforce. So here is a simple scene from Ramayana. Rama is the hero of Ramayana, the epic. And in this case, if you see the three figures, three human beings in the picture, you can quickly tell that Rama is the one with the bow and arrow. And then beside him is a Brahman, an upper caste man, pointing to somebody far out. And as you can see in the text, what this scene is depicting is that there is a lower caste person way in the background reciting Sanskrit verses, reciting Vedas, and trying to do what is usually set aside for only Brahmins to do. We'll get to some of these terms in a little bit, who is a Shudra, who is a Brahmin, and all that stuff. But just follow along with me for a second here. So basically, this Brahmin is pointing out to this Shudra and complaining to Rama, the king, and saying that that Shudra is reciting verses and he's trying to learn things. He's trying to educate himself and he's trying to do things which are mostly set aside for only Brahmins to do. And lo and behold, Rama, as the king, has his kingly duty towards Brahmins. So in this, Rama executes Shambhuka for reading Vedas. So we can see what the lawfulness or what was the law that Rama was trying to keep up. Here is another example from Mahabharata where Dronacharya, the man in the middle, has just asked the boy who has knelt over to give him an offering. A student usually gives an offering to a teacher in Indian mythology. So he has asked for this knelt boy to give him an offering and the offering here that he has asked is his right thumb. So the background to this story is the knelt boy is a tribal person. He doesn't fall in the Brahmin, Kshatriya, or Vaishya caste, one of the top three. However, he has taken this teacher as his guru and he has made a mud statue which is behind him, and using him as his guru, he has practiced bow and arrow, the skill of bow and arrow. And in this case, the teacher is not very happy that he has done that because education, whether it be skilled in arms and ammunition or fighting or education of Vedas, is kept only to the privileged castes. And in this case, this boy has crossed over and learned how to use a bow and arrow. So in a way, to exclude him from ever using his bow and arrow, his thumb is being asked so that he can never actually practice the art of archery. So from these examples, we can see that the lawfulness that Hindu gods are upkeeping is caste law. Please check this article. I found it after the fact, and it shows that some tribal archers, as a mark of respect to Ekalavya, do not use their thumbs while practicing archery. Here is a better description in one of the books of Hindus where it is strictly coded as to who is eligible to do what. So, per this code, it shares that a Shudra is only eligible to serve the other three castes. That's the only reason they are born. And for a woman must be kept in dependence by the males under their lock and key. And you can quickly see how it is different that for a Brahmin, though, whether he steals cattle, grain, or if he has intercourse with women, or if he were to slay women, Shudras, Kshatriyas, or Vaishyas, there is very little punishment to them. So hopefully you are seeing that there is a distinction based on how you are born as to what you are allowed as privilege and how strict punishment is if you move away from your prescribed role in the society. The law that Hindu gods enforce and keep in effect is caste system. Caste system is a birth-based hierarchy where some by birth are considered worthy. That's it. They can be a scoundrel in real life. They can be a cheater. They can be a very unscrupulous person in real life. But because by birth they were born as a Brahmin, they are considered worthy. And some of them who are born as lower caste, underprivileged castes, irrespective of what their values might be, what contributions they make to the society, how educated they are, it doesn't matter. They're always considered filthy and unfit for some social engagements. And the biggest sticking point in this is once you're born a Brahmin, there's nothing which will reduce your worth. And once you're born as a Shudra or as an untouchable, there is nothing you can do to raise your worth in social classification. So, this system is what Hindu gods enforce and take any number of avatars to come back and keep. Let me take a break here. Nishant, are there any questions that have already come up?
Not yet.
Okay. Can I give an option for one or two of you to ask a question if you have, just based on the 10 slides that I have shared so far? This question asked by one of the students. Caste seems to be based on birth. However, I still want if the legitimate, concrete way for in caste status. Um, Usually, no. The answer is no. There might be a little bit of recognition given to you, but that still doesn't get you anywhere. For example, India had a Dalit president, and there is a little difference in India. President is just a rubber stamp over there. The prime minister holds all the power, unlike in America. But when push comes to shove, he was not allowed to enter a temple because Shudras and untouchables. This person was an untouchable. Untouchable and Dalit is a little interchangeable word. He was not allowed entry into a temple. There are also many members of parliament who, in some cases, have actually married a person of an upper caste or a Brahmin. So, a Dalit person or an untouchable person has married a Brahmin woman, and these Dalit son in laws were not allowed into the house when their own kids were having a Brahmin ceremony. Like Brahmins have a ceremony to, let's say, name the child, and it's a big thing. So after on the 7th day or the 15th day, whatever is the auspicious day, they are naming the kid who this person actually is the father of, but he was not allowed into the house, and he's a member of parliament. So very rarely you might be in a good position, you might have good education, you might become a professor, you might become a doctor, but in terms of social engagement is where you will be shown where you stand. A follow-up question asked by the same student was around economic power. So the question is, if you are economically prosperous, does it alter your standing within the caste hierarchy? I will answer this question. I can loosely relate it to, let's say, racism here. You might see a person, and with Black Lives Matters and so much now, people digging in and presenting an alternate narrative. You can quickly say that, let's say, for example, a black person has a lot of money, but he might still not be able to buy a house in a specific suburb or something. In fact, the real estate agent doesn't even take them there. Forget about whether they can afford it or not. It can be similar in terms of Indian caste system. You might be very rich and you might be able to spend that. You might have that economic power and be able to send maybe your kids to a good school or something. But in terms of, let's say, there is a specific areas, Indian towns are very divided based on castes. Actually, a specific caste group lives here, a specific caste group lives here. So even if you have a lot of money, you can just walk into a Brahmin populated area and buy a house. They'll keep the house empty, vacant, and not sell it to you, but they wouldn't sell it to anybody of a different caste. So these are there is hardly anything which will move you through castes, through the layers of caste. You might have some economic power and you can flex that muscle, but it still doesn't move you in terms of social status. Um,
Okay, I'll just read the questions. So there's a question from Arjun Diti. It says, Rama executes Shambhuka. Was this slide to depict that people of the lower caste should not be allowed to engage in prayer? And then the next question is from Macy Boren, and then they're asking, are women within different castes treated differently? Do some have more rights than others?
Okay. So going back to Arjun's question, the answer is yes. That was the only reason Shambuka got executed. He was a Shudra, so he is a little slightly above the untouchables. And as per Manusmriti and all other codifications of Hindus, which is pretty much Brahmanism, Shudras are not allowed to read Vedas. There are other rules also. There are rules which say that if a Shudra were to utter Vedas, his tongue would be chopped off. Should be, not would be, should be chopped off, and that's the king's duty. Um, if a Shudra in hiding were to follow along and listen to the Vedas in an attempt to learn them, molten lead were to be poured into his ears so that he can never listen in the future. And these were pretty firmly executed. So the answer is yes. As to the other question about women, among women across all castes are treated as Shudras. Things have changed a little bit post independence and after Britishers have arrived in India. But across all castes, women in whether the women belong to Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras, or untouchables, they are all treated very as second class citizens. In some cases, women of Brahmin religion caste might be protected a little better, and actually that might mean that they are kept to the house much more than Shudra women, because Shudra women may and the families may not have enough capital to keep the women at home, so she might actually be a working person in that family. So in some cases, actually being a woman of an upper caste might actually work in opposition to you. uh, for example, in the lower castes, actually, maybe now it's a little different, but if a woman were to be a widow, she is still a working person and has potential to raise money for the family. So it was very easy for lower caste women to actually get remarried. However, if you are a woman of a upper caste, a Brahmin woman, forget about it. There is no remarriage for a widow from a Brahmin caste. It doesn't matter whether you are 18 and you have become a widow, or if you are 60 and you have become a widow. You are just packed off with you are either a house slave at that point in time with no husband in the in-laws family, or you are packed up with a little bit of whatever you can and put in a ashram or like a home where it eventually is a it there you are slaving for the bigger house, and in some cases it's also become sexual slavery there. um, Let me hopefully that helps. Let me move on with a few more slides and then we'll come back to more questions. So, just to give you a visual, these are the castes that I have been talking about. Within Hindu religion, there are 5 layers. Brahmins sit on top of it, Kshatriyas right below, Vaishyas, Shudras, and then untouchables. And the most important thing is the left line where it shows that there is a downward mobility. Because today, Brahmins are not just priests and academics, there are also Brahmin generals in the army. There are Brahmin cooks. There are Brahmin merchants who actually have huge holdings. And then Kshatriyas. So each caste, when push comes to shove and they need to find a source of income or a means of thing, they are able to move down. But it is hard for the people at the bottom rung to kind of try to do anything which will move them up top. Though there is a small sliver of them that they move, they are pushed to do the same things that they've always been doing. We will now touch upon how this came about. Basically, Brahmanism, the idea of caste, came along about 3000 BC, 2500 BC, when Aryans from from Ural Mountains, Persia, they started moving out for greater pastures, and a bunch of them moved into India. They then ran into the native people of India, and then as they were fighting among themselves and also among against the Indians, they established this caste hierarchy. At some point, it was also skin color based because they were a little fairer and the natives were a little darker colored. But eventually, it all muddled up, and it came to a point where castes formed based on birth. So in 2500 BC, Aryans came around, and for about 1,000 years, after conflicting with enough native Indians and everything, they eventually established caste system with Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas. And whoever they kept conquering and pushing out, they called them Shudras, and they were to be the servants of the rest of the three castes. Buddha in 600 BC was the first person who realized that this is not the way a society should be, and he was the one who fought against caste system. As much as Buddhism is about a religion and a set of principles, Buddha's prime aim and prime thing was also social. He was a first social revolutionary who opposed caste system. And from his time to until when Manusmriti came about, the little book I showed you where there are different rules as to who needs to follow what, India was a pretty secular country under Buddhism. Everybody was treated fairly. Caste system was pretty on the brinks of extinction. But what turned it around was after a succession of Buddhist emperors, a Buddhist emperor had a Brahmin commander in chief. That Brahmin commander in chief, Pushyamitra Shunga, killed or assassinated Brihadatta and turned the whole country back into a Brahmin led, caste led world. So that's why post Buddhism, we see strong books come up with strict codifications for caste system, and also there are enough Buddhists and those who were actually pushed out of the villages and towns and cities who did not accept their fate and going back into the caste system, and that is where we see strong untouchables come up. Before that, untouchables were very fringe people who did not make a big deal of the population. But you see more and more untouchables because Buddhists who did not go back into the Hindu fold were pushed out of the villages, and they are the ones who now live on the outskirts as untouchables. And also, they were pushed into the forest area and the hills, and they are the ones who are the tribals. So after untouchables came into being, you have different things that happen in India. There are Muslim invasions, and there is Sikh religion that comes up by through Guru Nanak, and then we have a British Raj established once East India Company comes in around 600 AD. The final line here is about Dr. Ambedkar, and we will touch upon Dr. Ambedkar in a few more slides pretty soon. Let me take a few questions here, if there are any.
No questions on the chat. Arnav just pointed out that Brihadatta Maurya was killed by Pushyamitra Shunga, I think 187 to 180 BC. There's a date that Arnav
Sure.
clarified.
Okay, thank you for that. So, untouchables and the concept of untouchability has come up based on two main principles. The first thing is Brahmins had contempt and hatred towards these broken men, the Buddhists, who did not go back into the Brahmin Hindu religious fold. The second thing that makes it untouchables is the continuation of beef eating by untouchables. So there are two things that make untouchables the group that they are. First thing is they did not go back into the Hindu fold. Rather, they left the villages and towns and stayed as broken community. And this broken community continued to eat beef and also continued to engage with a lot of beef eating activities. That was the reason for the pollution aspect of untouchables. An untouchable's touch is deemed to pollute a Brahmin or a caste Hindu. Their sight or seeing even an untouchable sometimes is considered as polluting. Or lest even their shadow falling on a Brahmin or somebody is considered as polluting. Let me share an interesting tidbit over here because I'm talking about bee feeding. It is interesting that bee feeding should make somebody untouchable in the eyes of Brahmins, because if we read any kind of Vedas, Brahmins were humongous, voracious bee feeders. Their whole Vedas, their whole practice of religion, if it were to even call religion, is nothing but fire, praying to the fire god while sacrificing copious amounts of cows and cattle and having a feast. So what happened is the people were fed up with Brahmins asking for a cow sacrifice every time there was even a simple ceremony. Then, as we realized, Buddha came in and Buddha questioned everything that the Brahmins were doing. He questioned the social structure they have put in, he questioned the sacrifices that they were doing, of animals and in some cases even humans. So, when Buddhism took over, Brahmins had to come up with a counter plan. And the counter plan was not just to give up bee feeding, they took it to the extreme. They couldn't just say, now we are also all for universal love and we also don't need you to do sacrifices anymore. They had to go to the other extreme, which is why, from being voracious bee feeders, they went to the other extreme and became vegetarians. So now, if you see why Brahmins are vegetarians, that's the reason, because they had to not just put a front against Buddhism, but they had to like trounce it. So that's a neat little tidbit. When you hear that Brahmins don't eat meat, it has nothing to do with a consciousness for this good of the world or the environment or just being humane. Nothing. It's a very specific tactic to prove one step beyond Buddhism and kind of bring people back into their fold. I'm gonna try to play a little video clip.
I always say that as I met Mr. Gandhi in the capacity of an opponent, I have a feeling that I know him better than most other people because he had opened his real fangs to me and I could see the inside of the man. You see, while others who generally went there as devotees saw nothing of him except the external appearance which he had put up as a Mahatma. And so I say that I understand him better than most of the people who have associated themselves with him can say.
So how would you sum up what you found in him?
So far as India is concerned, he was, in my judgment, an episode in the history of India, never an epoch maker. His memory is kept up because the Congress party annually, if he gives a holiday, either on his birthday or some other day connected with some event in his life, has a celebration. Now if you read the two papers, you will see how Mr. Gandhi was deceiving the people. In the English paper, he posed himself as an opponent of the caste system and of untouchability, and that he was a Democrat. But if you read his Gujarati magazine, you will see him a more orthodox man. He has been supporting the caste system, the Varnashram Dharma.
So you would say Gandhi was an orthodox Hindu?
Yes, he was absolutely an orthodox Hindu. He was never a reformer. He has no dynamics in him. All this talk about untouchability was just for the purpose of making the untouchables drawn into the Congress. That was one thing. And secondly, he wanted that the untouchables should not oppose his movement, Swaraj.
Okay, I think I saw an interesting question there saying that does eating beef lower the standard of a Brahmin? Unfortunately, the answer is nothing. Nothing will ever lower the status of a Brahmin. Maybe he might get a little slap on the wrist by his parents or family saying, "Hey, how can you eat beef?" or whatnot. But nothing. But nothing, because that's how the caste system is built. Like you read, forget about beef eating. If a Brahmin were to kill a woman, Shudra or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya, a whole human being, his punishment was just a little slap on the wrist. So eating beef today, even in this day, by a Brahmin would not lower anything. So forget about eating beef. Fine, eating you have to consume. Do you guys realize that India, with all the Brahmins saying don't eat meat and everything, or they're vegetarian, is the third largest exporter of beef in the world? In fact, it was second a year ago. Brazil took over, and now it's the third. And almost most of these beef exporting companies are owned by Brahmins. So there you go. A little that question caught my attention. So I wanted to share. It's a privileged world. It's a privileged group of people. Not much they do will cause them any harm, especially post independence, where things have been surrounded and have again been made into a Brahmin Raj. People call it Hindu Raj, but I call it Brahmin Raj because Hindus, while it encompasses untouchables all the way up to the Brahmins, the whole country is now set up to only benefit the Brahmins. So I call it the Brahmin Raj. So one of the things I wanted to do in this session was to introduce to you a far more important person with regards to India than Gandhi. So the reason I wanted to showcase Dr. Ambedkar is because he was the emancipator of Indian untouchables. After Buddha in 600 BC, Dr. Ambedkar is the one who had such a profound effect and in modern India. I'll skip a few slides when I get to them because it's going to get too deep into Dr. Ambedkar's life and stuff. I'll talk about this slide and then I'll go to show a very specific thing that Gandhi did. So here is Dr. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar's question when he was invited by Indian National Congress to participate in India's freedom struggle was, freedom for whom? Because he knew that if Britishers were to leave and the caste system and the society remained intact, it was Brahmins who were in the positions of power under Britishers in civil servant jobs and bureaucracy and with enough economic power that they would take over India, which is what we see now. So Dr. Ambedkar's question was always freedom for whom? In the context of American society, you can see the same thing. When Americans, white Americans, celebrate 4th of July as Independence Day, Black Americans are rightfully asking, who the heck got independence? Because our men are all still incarcerated in the prisons. So think of it in the same parallels. When Indians say we got freedom and all that stuff, we got freedom from the Britishers, and Brahmins have full control over everything. The lowest of the low castes are still struggling. So that's the reason I wanted to touch on this topic. See some parallels here between 4th of July and Juneteenth. And also, what about Native Americans? When America says we got independence and we celebrate 4th of July as Independence Day, you're pretty much completely erasing the narrative of Native Americans. So here's the thing that Gandhi did during independence time. Around independence, Britishers were trying to understand how to give more and more power to Indians to self-rule themselves. So there were a couple of roundtable conferences under the Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald in London, right? So the first roundtable conference, when everybody was invited, Indian National Congress just brushed it aside, saying that if we, Indian National Congress, don't go to the roundtable conference, what the heck will they achieve? Because Indian National Congress is a very strong Brahmin party, and they realize that without us, educated, privileged people there, what the heck will these lower caste people achieve? And to their chagrin, a lot was achieved in the first roundtable conference. Now, a second roundtable conference was called for to confirm some of these things. And this time around, British government realized that Indian National Congress doesn't want to come to it. So they did not even send an invitation to Indian National Congress. But this time, despite not getting an invitation, Gandhi shows up at the second roundtable conference. One of the things on the second roundtable conference, the docket, was self governing by untouchables. Basically, untouchables were going to be given a few separate electorates where only untouchables elect their own leaders and send them to the Constituent Assembly. So this was called special electorates. So Dr. Ambedkar had put forth this proposal because, as an untouchable, he realized that untouchables should elect their own leaders so that they have a say in the parliament. Gandhi completely opposed it. And not only did he oppose it in the meeting, in the roundtable conference, what he did was that night after this proposal was put, he threw a feast for the Muslim League, which was the other big party back then. And he invited the leaders of the Muslim League, fed them well, and then asked them for a favor. He told them that Indian National Congress, on his behalf, would sign all 14 demands that Muslim League had if they were to oppose Dr. Ambedkar from getting special electorates. So he was doing an like a back-ended deal with Muslim League instead of actually confronting and stating pros and cons of why he is opposing the separate electorates for untouchables. So that's for me, the sign of a person who lacks integrity and who is pitting one group against the other group. So when Muslim League heard this proposal from Gandhi, they were astonished that a man of his stature, because they didn't still realize how a fallen person he is, they actually opposed him, and they told Gandhi that as Muslims, as a separate community, they were enjoying separate electorates themselves. And that was true. British government had given separate electorates to Muslims to pick up their own leaders. They had also given separate electorates to Sikhs to elect their own leaders. They had also given separate electorates to Anglo-Indians to elect their own leaders. So Muslim League said, when all of these communities and ourselves are enjoying separate electorates, we can, in all good conscience, we have no way that we can oppose Dr. Ambedkar from getting the same privileges or putting forth the same demands. So that's one thing where we can clearly see how Gandhi can fall to such low standards. And the whole reason he wanted to do that was he wanted to oppose a community, an untouchable community who were coming into their own, who were demanding self-respect, dignity, and the ability to pick their own leaders so they can get better. Within the context of Indian history, Dr. Ambedkar sums up Indian history as nothing but a history of mortal conflict between Buddhism and Brahmanism. Buddhism encompassing anybody and everybody who has fought for the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and Brahmanism, which is all about holding privilege and just having a rule of law where they are on the top. So this, in brief, is who Dr. Ambedkar is. He is also relegated very much as an untouchable leader, which is not true. He was a great economist. The reason we have a Reserve Bank of India, similar to a Fed here in America, is because Dr. Ambedkar put forth that idea. Women have maternity leave because Dr. Ambedkar put it. Women have a right to property. That's because Dr. Ambedkar put it as law. No Brahmin leader has thought of all those things. It was Dr. Ambedkar who has put forth all those laws to serve all of Indians, not just untouchables. But again, as we know, narratives can be one-sided, one-dimensional, and heroes are always portrayed by those who write the history, and Brahmins write history in India. So Dr. Ambedkar is at most relegated as a leader of untouchables, also known as Dalits. So that's a misfortune. And that's the thing that I'm trying to correct here. And many a new Ambedkarite that we call ourselves of the younger generation, newer generation is trying to correct. I'm going to do a quick time check here, but Nishant, any questions?
Yes, there are actually a few interesting questions. The most recent one, since you're talking about Dr. Ambedkar, Annabeth asked, how did Dr. Ambedkar become a doctor if he was an untouchable? or was he just an ally for the community?
Dr. Ambedkar is an untouchable, he's a Dalit, he's not an ally. What happened is when Britishers came into India, they are still colonizers. They abused Indian land, Indian people, slavery, and all that stuff. But while doing all of that stuff within their white colonism, they also realized a few things wrong with Indian society because they did come with the Western democratic ideals. So what Britishers did, and also part of it is their self-interest. What Britishers did was they quickly realized that there are some hardworking people within the Shudra and the untouchable community who, if they befriend, can be their muscle power. So Britishers started a few regiments with untouchables actually, and Dr. Ambedkar's father was a major in one of those regiments called the Mahar regiment. Mahar is a subcaste within untouchable caste. And also, these Britishers made some rules which opened schooling and education to all Indians. So, Dr. Ambedkar's father was such a recipient of maybe just a third grade or a fourth grade education, and that passed on. So now Dr. Ambedkar's father and family have a bit of education among their life, have a bit of property, perhaps they earned some money, and also they had the power of being in the armed forces. So that trickled a little bit into Dr. Ambedkar's life. And Dr. Ambedkar had another very good supporter of his growth in a Maharaj, a king from the Maharashtra area. You would probably know the most important city there would be Bombay or Mumbai. So the king of Shahu Maharaj took a liking to Dr. Ambedkar, and under his scholarship, provided that Dr. Ambedkar comes back and works for him, he gave him enough money to come to New York and study in Columbia University, then London School of Economics and Oxford University, among other things. So Dr. Ambedkar almost got advantage of Britishers' rules around education and a good supporter in Sahu Maharaj. The next question asked was on Article 15 as to when if Dr. Ambedkar had put it in the Constitution, and Arnab answered and gave a little more color to that. Despite being an untouchable, eventually rose to the heights of being the first law minister of India, independent India, and also right before independent India was handed over to Indians, or India was handed over back to Indians, Britishers put up something called a Constituent Assembly and then a constitution writing draft committee, and Dr. Ambedkar became the architect of the constitution. And there are also accounts of how of the 16 or 14 people who were in the draft constitution, every other person had, and as students, when there is a group project given, there is probably one person working and everybody else is kind of whiling away their time. So that's exactly what happened even during Dr. Ambedkar's with the draft committee. Every other drafting committee member had one reason or the other not to actually put in any effort to write or come up with the constitution. So the constitution sits there solely because of Dr. Ambedkar's rigorous efforts for like 6 to 8 months or more. And also, it's not just those 6 to 8 months. He was preparing for this thing from forever. He had studied constitutions of America, England, or any other democratic country for about 20 to 25 years, even before he ever thought he would be picked as the architect of the constitution. So he came with all that knowledge and he pretty much wrote the constitution. So if there is anything in constitution which is good for the humanity, it's probably Dr. Ambedkar. Anything which now puts like things like come in where like, well, we will not consider Muslims or others as Indians and they have to prove it with a birth certificate, is post Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and some Brahmin government putting that injunction to make it tough and create a unstabilized society, because that's when systems like caste oppression thrive. So I think I'll go on and move on to the presentation, because some of you might be thinking, how relevant is this Brahmin Raj that I keep? What proof do I have? For any modern society, there are 4 pillars of democracy: legislature, executive body, judiciary, and media. With regards to legislature, there are about 5 Indian national level parties: Indian National Congress, Communist Party of India, Communist Party of India, Marxists, Bharatiya Janata Party, abbreviated as BJP, and Trinamool Congress. So there are five big Indian National Congress, Indian parties. All five parties are run by Brahmins. So in legislature, while their members underneath them might be from other castes, because there is a little bit of a reservation system going on, the high command in all of these groups is Brahmins. Chatterjee, Mukherjee, Banerjee, Gokhale, Tilak, Agarkar, some Dange, Konkanastha Brahmins, some Nambudri Brahmins. These are all subcastes that I just threw at you guys. These are all Brahmin last names, and these parties are run by these last name people with these last names. So they're all 100% Brahmins. With regards to executive body, which is where all things finally get executed, there are about 70% to 80% Brahmins in IAS, IFS, IPS. And look at the actual percentage. They are only 3% in number, but their executive percentage of members who are in executives are like 70 plus. Within the judiciary, Supreme Court of India, 50% of Supreme Court judges are Brahmins. The other 45% of the other 50 are made up by Kshatriyas and Vaishyas. There are one or two Shudras, and I don't know if there is a current sitting Supreme Court justice who is a untouchable, though there are 15% untouchables in India. So judiciary again is in fact, there was a funny article. Mishra is a Brahmin last name. There was a funny article recently which said, are there one too many Mishras in Supreme Court? So not just Brahmins, within the Brahmins there is a certain subcaste which took over, and there were more than a few Supreme Court judges or their secretaries in Supreme Court. Finally, in media, almost all media that make sense or of any value are all run by either Vaishyas or Brahmins. Even the new, be it TV, electronic media, or newspapers, almost all of them are of the upper caste. There was I'm going to skip to the last slide here. Just so there is a study done by Oxfam India, Who Tells Our Stories Matters, and if you get a chance, go read this. In this, it kind of tells that of anybody of like different anchors on different news channels and everything, not many are Dalits. And even when the topic is about an untouchable issue or something, of the five in the panel who are discussing that, probably there is one token untouchable. And we all know how token representation just gets talked over, never given their time, and sometimes you veer off of the topic and go somewhere else because there's something else which the privileged caste person deems important than listening to the person who is representing the underprivileged caste. So I would suggest that you read this if you want to understand a little bit of that. The reason I went there is because I wanted to make sure that we realize that what I am sharing is backed by facts. Just look at your screen for reference material and the organizations. And I really, really encourage you to watch India Untouched if you can. The YouTube movie in the reference material section.
Cool. So I'll just ask maybe a couple of the questions that came up. But one of the questions was that's interesting is, where do other religions fit into the caste system? This was a question that came up earlier by Juliana.
Okay.
And I'll just ask the second one so you can answer them together. Was Derby asked, is there any legitimate concrete way for someone to ascend in the caste status?
Thank you for both of those interesting questions. The first one, so most of the religions that have come to India had to take their converts from the local established population. So within the concept of religions, very specific to India, you will find caste hierarchy, though not as rigid as Hindu religion, in Christianity, Sikhs, and also Muslims. So, for example, some people identify themselves as Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims. These were originally untouchables under the Hindu fold who felt a little bit of freedom within these other religions, so they moved into these other religions. But by virtue of coming from a generation of untouchables, and untouchability and caste system is birth based, you still are considered a Dalit Muslim. You don't get full representation within Muslim religion or Christianity. And it has actual consequences wherein Dalit Christians on death are not allowed burial in the same grounds as other Christians are. They have a separate little nook somewhere and they have to only bury there. In case of Muslims, too, similar things I have seen, and also within Sikh religion, separate gurudwaras, separate temples for those who consider themselves upper caste Sikhs versus those who don't. And this is not an inherent problem of those religions. It is Brahmanism still that has spread over into those religions. So if you, because some people use this as an excuse saying, see, other religions also have caste system. I'm like, no, 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 no. Other religions came in decently healthy. It is Brahmanism that has diseased these other religions. So if you were to solve this problem, don't get um, don't get confused and go and focus on these other religions and try to clean them up or put your focus on there. Still focus on the main polluting agent, which is Brahminical ideology and Brahmanism. The only times I have seen something like that happen is if people of different castes have married, and for whatsoever reason, the privileged caste family has accepted the marriage, and while the lower caste person coming into their world is still considered lower caste, they have somehow absorbed the kids. That's at best what I can share, where somebody from a lower caste has kind of uh, merged into upper caste. I appreciate this opportunity. Always a pleasure to speak about this narrative that doesn't get much attention. So thank you so much for the class. The students, you were great. Thanks for all those amazing questions. I am very accessible. So if you have more questions, let me know. Nishant, also thank you. Thanks for helping me out with the event.